People ask me about the Steel Curtain, the Super Bowls, and what made that defense work. I understand why. We had a special group in Pittsburgh, but when you spend 12 years in the NFL, you learn pretty quickly that admiration has nothing to do with headlines. It comes from watching how a man prepares, how he handles pressure, and whether you can trust him when the play breaks down. I played beside some of the toughest men in football, and I lined up against players who could punish one bad step before you had time to recover. I never looked at the game emotionally. I looked at assignments, angles, discipline, and responsibility. That is how I judge players even now. So when I think about the 5 NFL legends I admired most, I think about the men who changed the way I understood the game. The first NFL legend I want to talk about is Andy Russell. When I came to Pittsburgh in 1971, I had played good football at Penn State, but that did not mean I understood how to be a professional linebacker. There is a difference. College teaches you how to compete. The NFL teaches you how quickly one careless step can put 6 points on the scoreboard. Andy understood that long before I arrived. He had been with the Steelers through seasons when there was not much winning, not much attention. And, certainly no reason for anybody in that locker room to feel important. Yet he prepared the same way every week. That stayed with me. A lot of players can be disciplined when they are chasing a championship. Andy had been disciplined when Pittsburgh was simply trying to become respectable. He was not the kind of veteran who needed to give you a speech every morning. He taught you by the way he worked. He knew the opponent's formations. He understood what the guards were telling him with their stance. He knew where the back wanted to go before the ball was snapped, and he expected the people beside him to know their responsibilities just as well. I watched that. I listened. When Andy corrected something, there was usually a reason behind it. He was not trying to prove that he was the veteran and I was the young guy. He was trying to make sure the defense did not give away a play because somebody failed to pay attention. People remember the Steelers linebackers from the championship years and think everything came together at once. It did not. Andy was already there when the foundation was still being built. By the time Jack Lambert arrived in 1974, Andy had helped establish what playing linebacker in Pittsburgh was supposed to look like. Jack brought a different kind of intensity. I had my own way of playing on the outside. Andy gave that group steadiness. We could communicate without turning every adjustment into a long conversation. We understood where each man belonged, and when you have that kind of trust, you can play faster without playing recklessly. One thing I respected about Andy was that he never acted as though the hard years did not matter once we started winning. Those seasons had shaped him. He knew how fragile success could be because he had seen the other side of it. When we finally reached the Super Bowl after the 1974 season, he did. I also remember how seriously we took keeping people out of the end zone. In 1975, during a game against San Diego, Andy and I had been taken out while we held a comfortable lead. The Chargers suddenly got the ball near our goal line, and I was sent back onto the field because the coaches wanted to protect the shutout. That tells you something about the standard we had developed. Winning was not enough if we became careless at the end. Andy understood that better than most because he had helped build that standard before the championships arrived. What I admired most was not one tackle or one season, it was his consistency. Andy Russell showed me that professionalism is what you do when nobody is celebrating you. He had already lived that lesson by the time I reached Pittsburgh, and I was smart enough to pay attention. Yes, the next NFL legend I want to talk about is Jack Lambert. People usually start with the face, the missing teeth, the stare, and all the photographs that made him look like he had been waiting his whole life to hit somebody. That was part of Jack, no question. He played angry and he did not hide it. But if that is all you saw, then you missed what made him such an important linebacker. Jack was a very smart football player. He understood the defense. He recognized what offenses were trying to create, and he knew how to put himself in position before the collision ever happened. When Jack arrived in Pittsburgh in 1974, nobody handed him a place in the middle of our defense because of his personality. He had to earn it. He was a young player coming into a group that already had experienced linebackers, and the NFL does not care how intimidating you looked in college. You have to prove that you can make the call, control the middle, and be where your teammates expect you to be. Jack did that quickly. Once he took control of that position, our defense changed. We became faster, more aggressive, and more certain about what was happening inside. I played on the outside, so my relationship with the middle linebacker was built on trust. There were moments when I had to carry a receiver, close down a running lane, or hold the edge while knowing the inside gap was being handled. With Jack, I did not need to look over my shoulder. He would be there. That might sound simple, but it is one of the most important things a linebacker can give another linebacker. When you trust the man beside you, you stop hesitating, you react. In professional football, that small difference is often the whole play. Jack also brought an emotional edge that fit our defense. Joe Greene had already established that losing and careless football were not acceptable. Jack Lambert carried that same attitude into the middle of the field on every snap. If an opponent tried to intimidate us, Jack took it personally. If one of us made a mistake, he did not pretend it was fine. He expected you to correct it. Some players can create energy but lose discipline. Jack rarely made that mistake. His intensity had direction. He could be furious and still understand his assignment. The 1,974 season showed people what he could become. We went through the playoffs, reached Super Bowl IX, and faced Minnesota and New Orleans on the 12th of January, 1975. That game was not built around style or entertainment. It was a defensive fight, exactly the kind of game we understood. Minnesota scored only 6 points, and Jack looked completely comfortable in the middle of it. He was still a rookie, but he did not play like a man overwhelmed by the stage. He played as though he had been preparing for that responsibility for years. What I respected most about Jack was his honesty. There was no performance with him. He did not try to be friendly for the cameras and tough only on Sundays. What you saw was what he was. He cared about football, he cared about our defense, and he cared whether every man was doing his job. He and I were different. I was quieter. I tried to stay controlled and let the play tell me what to do. Jack brought everything closer to the surface, but those differences never separated us. They made the unit stronger. The public remembers Jack Lambert as one of the most frightening men ever to play linebacker. I remember the teammate behind that image. I remember the communication, the preparation, the discipline, and the confidence he gave the people around him. The hits made him famous. The intelligence made him great. That is why I admired him. The next NFL legend I want to talk about is O.J. Simpson. I am talking strictly about the football player I had to prepare against, because when O.J. carried the ball for Buffalo, you could not defend him with reputation or emotion. You had to defend him with discipline. He was one of those backs who could make an entire defense look wrong, even when only one man had made the mistake. A linebacker could take one step too far inside, lose the proper angle, and suddenly O.J. was running through open grass. That was how quickly he could punish you. People remember the speed, and they should, but speed alone does not explain why he was so difficult to play against. O.J. understood how to set up a defender. He could press toward one opening, make you commit your weight, and then cut into another lane before you could recover. From the outside linebacker position, I had to be especially careful. My job was not to chase every movement I saw. I had to protect the edge, maintain leverage, read the blocking, and make sure I did not create the exact escape route he wanted. That required patience, which is not always easy when the ball's in the hands of a runner that dangerous. Your instinct tells you to attack. Against O.J. Attacking without control could get the entire defense into trouble. Buffalo built its running game around getting him moving with room to see the field. Their offensive line could pull, create angles, and give him enough space to choose his path. Once he reached the second level, there were very few defenders who could recover after taking a bad angle. In 1973, O.J. became the first player in NFL history to rush for more than 2,000 yards in a season. He finished with 2,003 yards in only 14 games. You do not produce that kind of season because defenders are unaware of you. Every team knew Buffalo wanted to give him the football. Every defensive meeting began with stopping him. He still averaged more than 143 rushing yards per game. That tells you how exceptional he was during that period. We saw that challenge clearly in Pittsburgh. When Buffalo came into the divisional playoff after the 1974 season, stopping O.J. was the central responsibility of our defense. He had hurt us before, and we understood that if he controlled the game, Buffalo could control the afternoon. We held him to 49 rushing yards that day, but nobody in our locker room treated that as proof that he was overrated. It proved the opposite. It took 11 defenders playing with discipline, preparation, and trust to keep one runner from changing the game. That is what great opponents do. They force you to sharpen every part of your own game. Preparing for OJ made me study the offensive line more closely. It made me think about pursuit angles, backside responsibility, and how quickly one defender could compromise the structure of a defense. You could not become impatient because he had gained only 2 yards on the previous carry. The next one could go 60. I never believed admiration required you to enjoy competing against somebody. Most of the time, the players you respected most were the ones who made your week uncomfortable. O.J. Simpson did that. He made you work in the meeting room, communicate on the practice field, and stay accountable on every snap. I admired him because his ability demanded our very best. Against a runner like that, being almost correct was the same as being wrong. The next NFL legend I want to talk about is Dick Butkus. When I entered the league in 1971, Dick was already the name every linebacker knew. You did not need to play for the Chicago Bears or study their defense every week to understand what he represented. He had changed the way people looked at the position. He was physical, obviously, but that was only the part everybody could see on television. What impressed linebackers was how quickly he found the football, how rarely he arrived unsure of himself, and how completely he finished a play once he got there. Dick and I were not the same kind of linebacker. He played in the middle where the game came at him through guards, centers, fullbacks, and runners trying to reach the heart of the defense. I played outside where I had to cover more space, carry receivers, protect the edge, and read things from a different angle. I never looked at Dick and thought I should copy everything he did. That would not have made sense. Different bodies, different responsibilities, different systems. But I watched the certainty in his game. He trusted what he saw, and when he moved with purpose. That is harder than it looks. Linebacker is processing several things at once before the ball's even snapped. You are checking the formation, the alignment of the backs, the position of the tight end, the stance of the lineman, and any movement that might change your responsibility. After the snap, all of that becomes faster. Dick had the instincts to sort through the confusion immediately. He did not spend the play reacting late. He often looked as though he had reached the answer before everyone else had finished reading the question. The public image centered on violence. Dick hit people hard, and he played with an anger that opponents could feel. But I always thought it was unfair to reduce him to intimidation. Plenty of men can play angry. Not many can play angry while remaining technically sound. Dick understood leverage. He understood pursuit. He knew how to get his body into the proper position separate from blockers and control the runner instead of simply throwing himself into the collision. That is what made him more than a collection of hard hits. He also had a remarkable instinct for the football itself. He forced fumbles, recovered loose balls, and intercepted passes because he was not satisfied with merely stopping the play. He wanted possession. That mindset matters. A tackle ends a down. A takeaway changes the game. Dick always seemed aware that the job of a defense was not only to resist an offense, but to take something from it. By the time I arrived in Pittsburgh, Dick had already been selected to 6 Pro Bowls. He would finish with 8 straight selections from 1,965 through 1,972. That kind of consistency tells you more than one famous afternoon ever could. Offenses changed. Coaches adjusted. Injuries accumulated. Every opponent knew where he was. He remained the standard anyway. His final seasons overlap with my first 3 years in the league. We did not build a friendship that I can sit here and exaggerate. I am not going to invent private conversations that never happened. My admiration came from watching another linebacker perform the position at a level that demanded attention. When you were a young player in that era, you knew what Dick Butkus had done. You knew the reputation, but more importantly, you knew the film supported it. I played the position with more patience and less visible emotion. Dick played as though every snap was a personal confrontation. Yet underneath those differences, we valued the same things: reading the play correctly, getting to the football, and making sure the offense remembered who controlled that part of the field. I never tried to become Dick Butkus. No serious player should try to become somebody else. But he showed an entire generation how much authority one linebacker could carry. The noise around him came from the hits. My respect came from everything that happened before them. And the NFL legend I admired the most was Joe Greene. By the time I arrived in Pittsburgh in 1971, Joe had already begun changing the direction of that football team. People look back now and see the championships, the Hall of Famers, the steel curtain, and all the photographs that make it seem as though Pittsburgh was always destined to become great. It was not. The Steelers had spent a long time losing. Joe came into that environment in 1969 and refused to accept that losing was simply part of the organization. That was the first thing I admired about him. He did not inherit a standard. He helped create one. I played behind Joe, so I understood his value in a very direct way. A defensive tackle can make life easier for a linebacker, but that does not mean the linebacker gets to relax. Joe demanded the opposite. When he split a double team, forced the guard to turn his shoulders, or disrupted the backfield before the runner could settle into the play, the rest of us had to react immediately. He created opportunities, but he expected us to finish them. There was no room for admiring the play while it was happening. You had to be in position. Joe was powerful, but what made him different was the combination of power, quickness, and awareness. He could beat a blocker with his first step, hold his ground against two men, or force an offense to change the way it protected the interior. When an offense spends that much attention on one defensive lineman, everybody else benefits. Jack Lambert benefited. I benefited. Our defensive backs benefited because quarterbacks had less time. But Joe never used that as a reason to claim credit for everything. He understood that defense only works when all 11 men handle their responsibility. That was our relationship on the field. Joe would disrupt the blocking scheme, and I had to read what followed. If I guessed, I could ruin the advantage he had created. If I stayed patient and trusted the structure, the play often came directly to us. That kind of coordination does not happen because a group has a good nickname. It happens through repetition, communication, and a willingness to hold one another accountable. Joe had very little patience for careless football. He could accept being beaten on a good play. What he did not accept was losing because somebody failed to prepare or ignored his assignment. I respected that because I felt the same way. I was never interested in performing emotion for people. Joe showed more of his frustration than I did, but the source was the same. We believed a professional player owed his teammates complete attention. The turning point people usually recognize came in the early 1970s when the roster finally began to match the standard Joe had been demanding. I arrived in 1971. Franco Harris came in 1972. Jack Lambert joined us in 1974. By the end of that season, we were playing Minnesota in Super Bowl IX. We won 16-6, and Joe was named the game's most valuable player. That recognition was deserved, but the award did not suddenly make him our leader. He had been leading long before the rest of the league noticed. I watched him do it through 4 championship seasons. I watched offenses build protection plans around him and still struggle to, keep him from affecting the play. I watched him absorb double teams so the rest of us could run. I also watched him demand more when winning might have made other teams comfortable. After the first championship, Joe did not behave like the work was complete. He understood that reaching the top and staying, there were 2 different jobs. The name Mean Joe became larger than the man in some ways. People saw the intensity, the strength, and the moments when his temper showed. I saw a teammate who cared deeply about the quality of our football. I saw somebody who had arrived when Pittsburgh had no winning identity and helped build one through his own expectations. That is much harder than joining a team after the culture has already been established. There were many great players on those Steelers teams. We had men who are still discussed whenever people talk about the best defense in NFL history. I admired all of them. But Joe stood at the beginning of the change. He made people believe that the Steelers did not have to remain what they had always been. Then he backed that belief with his play every Sunday. That is why he is first for me. Joe Greene was not simply the best defensive lineman I ever played beside. He was the standard the rest of us had to meet. He changed the line of scrimmage, he changed our locker room, and in the end, he helped change the entire Pittsburgh Steelers organization. When I look back at these 5 men, I do not see a ranking built from statistics or reputation. I see 5 different lessons. Andy Russell showed me what professionalism looked like before winning made it easy to be committed. Jack Lambert showed me that intensity means very little unless it is connected to discipline and responsibility. O.J. Simpson reminded me that one mistake in space could destroy an entire defensive plan. Dick Butkus showed every linebacker of my generation how much authority one player could bring to the middle of a defense. And Joe Greene showed me that one man could help change the expectations of an entire organization. That is what admiration means to me. It is not about pretending somebody was perfect. None of us were. It is about recognizing the qualities that forced you to raise your own standard. Every one of those men made football more demanding for the people around him. Some did it as teammates, some did it as opponents, but all of them made the game clearer to me. We won 4 Super Bowls in Pittsburgh, and I am proud of that. But no championship is built by one player, one coach, or one famous defense. It is built by men who trust each other enough to do difficult work without needing attention for it. Those are the players I always respected most. So those are the 5 NFL legends I admired the most. Now I would like to hear your answer. Which player made you understand football differently?